So I'm going to talk about understanding your cooling system, how to diagnose it, where to look for leaks, why it's overheating, any issues you are going to have with your cooling system, and basically to know what you're looking at. So I'm going to break down each component of the cooling system. We start out with the reservoir, the overflow. It's called the degas bottle, reservoir, or the overflow. Some of these reservoirs are going to be pressurized and some are not. The pressurized ones will not have a cap on the radiator. The cap for the cooling system is in this plastic bottle. If it does have a cap on the radiator, most likely that the reservoir is not pressurized. So what happens is when you shut your vehicle off after it reaches operating temperature and say it's low on coolant for some reason, it's going to create a siphon from that overflow, and it's going to siphon it back into the cooling system so you have the proper level, which is the proper level is completely full. If you open the cap and you see that you're low on coolant, if you open the radiator and you look down, you can't see coolant at all, you have a leak. You're not supposed to be missing coolant. So further investigation needed. And some great ways to test for leaks is obviously starting it up and get it to operating temperature, and take a look around with a flashlight and follow the upper radiator hose, follow the lower radiator hose. Look around the head gasket. Look in front of the radiator. A big one to look at is the water pump, the heater hoses, and sometimes not as common, the heater core could actually fail and leak internally and in the vehicle. And if that's the case, you're going to have smell of coolant, and you're going to notice that pretty well. But other times you might not notice that your coolant is leaking or low. So maybe like once a month when you're at the gas station, it's good to do an inspection on your fluids and just make sure that everything is good. So going from the degas bottle, the reservoir, we're going to go to the radiator. So the radiator is cooled by ram air, and that's just through driving. It's air. The air passes through that radiator, and it's like a heat exchanger. So the heat is passed from the coolant into air through ram or a cooling fan. Most vehicles nowadays are electric cooling fan, which are better on horsepower, better for engine performance, and there's just a better way to cool the radiator. So a way to know if your radiator fan is going out or is not working properly, you notice that you're overheating at stoplights. You're overheating when you're idling. You're going to be overheating when you're idling if you have cooling fan issues, because you're not traveling, you're not getting that ram air, and the cooling fan is not substituting for you being at idle. So it can, if once you reach operating temperature, it can overheat fairly quickly at idle with the fan being unoperational. So just because the fan is not working does not always mean it's the fan. You have your fuses, you have your relays, and a command comes from the engine computer, the PCM. So there's a lot of variables in there, and a good scan tool can help narrow this down quite a bit. If you scan, and the fan is not operating, most likely you might have a code for maybe fan circuit 1 or fan circuit 2. And the fan is controlled by high and low modes, and each one has its own circuit. The low mode goes through a resistor. The cooling fan has a resistor, and these resistors sometimes get water damage, and they will expand, and they'll create a high resistance in that circuit and cause the fan not to work. It basically has an open circuit. The electrons cannot flow through, and it's impeding the operation of the fan. So take a look at the resistor, make sure it's not swollen or looking green. Look at the connectors, pull the connectors off, and do an inspection on those connectors. You don't want anything green. You want to make sure it's connected tight and everything is good there. Also, if you have a nicer scan tool, you'll be able to have command functions with the scan tool. You'll be able to turn the fan on, off, and low in circuit 1, and you can turn the fan on and off in circuit 2. And, Launch makes a good scanner. I have Launch, and I only paid $150 for that, and they charge $30 per vehicle make. So Ford, you're going to have to pay $30. For GM, you're going to have to pay $30, but it's a necessity, and it's something you're going to need if you're going to be a professional technician, if you're going to take your job seriously, if you want to get the right answer and get it quickly, you're going to have a good scan tool. So coming out of the radiator, there's two hoses. There's going to be an upper hose and a lower hose. And these vary from make to make, car manufacturer, model to model, on how the engineers wanted to design this vehicle. Sometimes the thermostat could be on the lower, sometimes it could be on the upper. It just really depends on how they made it. So we'll say we go from the upper hose and we travel down that hose and we go to our thermostat. And the thermostat is a mechanical device, and inside of it there's some type of spring, and that spring opens and closes based off the temperature of the coolant. So water boils at 212, and with the right proper coolant, somewhere around 220. And good operating temperature is around 200 degrees, give or take. So that thermostat is going to keep the coolant from 180 to 200, whatever the engineers decided is the best operating temperature for that vehicle, for gas mileage, for performance. And these, like everything else, will fail. The gaskets around it will fail, around the housing, and internally they break apart. I've seen some thermostats, the springs just completely corroded and broke from not using the proper coolant, or they just don't open and close, they get stuck. Sometimes they'll be stuck closed. If they're stuck closed, it's going to be overheating. If it's stuck open, it's going to be harder to get to operating temperature. And yeah, so you just got to learn how to diagnose this properly. There's another thing that's pushing this coolant through the system is the water pump. The water pump is going to be driven by the accessory drive belt. These water pumps have bearings, and it's spinning on this pulley. So to keep it spinning, it has bearings, and these bearings fail quite often, and you're going to see coolant pouring out of there. Or there's a gasket around the water pump housing, and then those gaskets will fail. Depending on if it's an aftermarket gasket and they didn't seal it properly, it can fail. Or just of age of the vehicle, you can expect to change a water pump anywhere between 70 to 100,000 miles. You're going to see the water pump leaking. One thing to remember when you replace a water pump, you're going to introduce air to the system. So you want to make sure you fill it up to the brim, take the cap off, hit the accelerator, and rev it up to 25 to 3,000 RPMs consecutively. Turn the heat on full blast, and wait till you get good heat consistently out that vent. Then if you're getting constant heat, you know that you purge the air pretty well, and just I would usually let it idle 5 to 10 minutes, and then when you replace a component, you want to make sure you leak check it. Get it to operating temperature, get your heat to where it needs to be to the HVAC system, and look around the gasket, make sure there's no leaks. If you had any hoses off, double check your hoses, make sure that you clamp down those hoses, make sure there's nothing leaking. Make sure you didn't forget to put a clamp on, or even you might have forgotten to hook a hose up completely. Another part of the cooling system is the coolant temperature sensor. Sometimes they're on the cylinder head temperature sensor, and this just monitors the temperature of the coolant just like you think it does. So a good way to check to make sure the sensor is working is take a look at the live data in your scan tool and make sure it's reading the ambient air temperature. The temperature that is outside should be relatively the same temperature of the coolant when it's non-running. Before you started it, it should be relatively the same temperature. And you can unhook your connector and hook up your leads to it and put on ohm. And usually if you ohm it out, if it's a bad sensor, it's going to read OL, or open. It's infinite resistance. That means the circuit inside of the sensor is broken and you need to replace the sensor. And if that's the case, you're going to have a code in your scan tool. But this is further diagnosing. When you're diagnosing a car, you want to verify in many different ways and make sure you're certain, because this is someone else's vehicle. This is their means of transportation. It's a huge investment for them, and it's a liability for you. If you get it wrong, you're going to be responsible for the misdiagnosis, and you're going to look like an idiot. So make sure you get it right. Moving along, you have the heater core. The heater core is going to be inside the cab of the vehicle under the dash, and if this goes bad, you're going to have to usually pull the whole dash out, which involves pulling out the center console, pulling out pillars, pulling out, sometimes even maybe you got to take out the seats. It's a labor-intensive job, but it can be kind of fun. Some people don't like it. I do enjoy working on dashes and interior work, but that's very few in between as a mobile mechanic. What happens is the coolant passes through this heater core, which is like a miniature radiator inside, and it's ducted. So the HVAC ducts pass through this, and it's fed by ram air through a blower motor. The blower motor is usually on the passenger's side underneath the glove compartment, and it's blowing air from the cab through the cabin air filter into the heater core, into the cabin of the vehicle. And then the air is directed through series of actuators. You got mode door actuators, and you have temperature door actuators based off the driver's command of hot or cold, or the passenger's command of feet, dash, or vent. These actuators direct the air from the heater core into the cab. Heater cores will get clogged through debris. The fins through there are small, so any type of improper mixture of your coolant or improper water with hard water, if you're not using distilled water, if you're not using purchased coolant, you're going to get your cooling system clogged up, and you're going to have issues with your heater core. So a good flush every 50,000 miles, or drain and fill 30 to 50,000 miles, will prevent your heater core from clogging. That's all I'm going to cover today. If you have any comments, questions, concerns, please leave me a message. Thank you.